books behind you?
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I can say that most of them.
Most of them.
Yeah.
Right.
You have here the Shas, you know.
Right. So behind Rabbi Aviad, you can see the Babylonian Talmud, and I can even guess. Is it like I don't see very well, but if it's blue, I cannot tell what's the color there. What's the printing house? So it might be, yeah. The Babylonian Talmud has been belabored over by Jews for the last 1,500 years, and it's about 7,200 pages, and each page has 2 folios. So it's actually twice the. I mean, in all, it would take you 7 years roughly to read if you read 2 pages a day or 2 sides of a page a day.
Mr. Barak,
Yeah.
it takes me that long to get through Unit A.
Right. So it might take you specifically a little bit longer, but generally speaking, right. Yeah, but listen, for Rabbi Eliyahu Aviad, a magnum opus, such a great literary work, is something that is very familiar with, as he is a leading expert on Maimonides, who was, as far as Maimonides, actually Rabbi Eliyahu Aviad should not have read the Babylonian Talmud, because Maimonides actually wanted people to read his book, and then that would be good for everything, right?
You are right. You are right, but you know, actually, he said whoever can read, you know, the Talmud, of course, it's much better. But in his time, very few people understood the Talmud. Now, fortunately, you know, it's all over the world. They learn the Daf Yomi, you know.
Right. We've talked about it a little bit in the past.
Yeah, in our shul, we have done Daf Yomi already 4 times.
Right. So let me explain to the people what is Hadaf Hayomi. So
Please
there was
do.
there was a rabbi by the name of Meir Shapira, who lived in Poland, in the city of Lublin, and he had no children. So he said he had 2 kids. He didn't have any kids, any biological kids, but he had an academy that he founded, a yeshiva, which was called Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin, the wise men of Lublin. That was his first child, the academy. And the second child was this project of learning 1 page, which means 2 folios of the Babylonian Talmud every day. So every 7 years, one covers the whole Babylonian Talmud. I personally also try to follow that program as well. And I also have in this weekly, you can see it's really a book, a weekly booklet that I get every week. I also have the daily page of the Babylonian Talmud, and I also have Maimonides, actually 2 different programs of Maimonides, one where you learn 1 chapter a day and you finish after 3 years, and another one where you learn 3 chapters a day and you finish after 1 year, if everybody can do the math, right? So that's something that people do. It's very hard to follow, as much as it's called in Hebrew Hadaf Hayomi, which means the daily page, but some people call it Hamirdaf Hayomi, which literally means the daily pursuit, because you're always behind. So it's so that's a little bit about it. So it's already time. So I will present our esteemed guest for today, and then we'll get to talk. I'm especially excited of today's topic of conversation, because it's something that I love, among many other things that I love. So, but I'm especially excited. And Rabbi Dr. Eliyahu Aviad is he is formerly Israel's Education Ministry Torah Culture Department, the head of that unit in the Ministry of Education. We've talked about the fact that in Israel there is no separation of church and state, So there are religious studies that are incorporated to public school and public religious schools, and we've talked about it. He is the son of the late chief rabbi of the Yemenite Jewry, and a Maimonides expert from the first row, you know, the leading scholar, one of the leading scholars on Maimonides. I think you wrote your PhD on the psychology of Maimonides, if I'm not mistaken. And he wrote, it's the guide for the spiritually perplexed, capitalizing on Maimonides, Dalalt al-Hayrin, the guide for the perplexed, and educational hygiene for the soul. That's the book that was written by Rabbi Dr. Eliyahu Aviad. And he's also an expert on Yemenite Jewry. Yemenite Jewry, and let's talk a little bit. I want to start with something fun. I want to say that I did not prepare the rabbi to any of my questions, so I'm going to go a little bit wild with it. But I want to do something together, Rabbi, if you don't mind. I want to start. Okay, I want to start by reading. So people hear sometimes me reading biblical Hebrew, and they know how I read it, but they have never heard, first of all, they have never heard me reading like a Yemenite, and they have never heard a real Yemenite person reading the Bible. So what I want to do together is I want to put on screen the first few verses of the book of Genesis, of the book of Bereshit, which we all know. So for us to hear, do you want to go first reading it in the Yemenite traditional melody, or should I go first to surprise you that I can do not a bad impression of it? What would be more surprising for you?
Whatever you like, I can read that.
Okay, guys. So I'll do just the first verse because it's funny for me as a European Jew to do for an Ashkenazi Jew, and then you'll get the real version of it. Okay, guys. Okay. Bereshit boro Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'oras. Okay.
Excellent. Really, very good. The melody is.
But that's my problem in other traditions as well. I'm not very melodical.
You should improve it. I will do it now. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'oras v'ha'oras hoyatatahu v'bahu nahashach al panei taham ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המוים.
Okay, thank you very much. That was wonderful. Okay, I love it. This is the reason sometimes I go to a Yemenite synagogue, okay, because I love the melody. And as you noted, it is very different than how I usually read the text. I will just read it in kind of the regular not Yemenite tradition of the reading, how a modern Israeli would read it, and which is how I teach you to read it when we learn it. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Okay, and you must have noted the differences in many aspects, in many level of differences. First of all, the melodical tradition, when I read as an Ashkenazi Jew, as a descent of European Jews, I have a different melody. But it's not just that. It goes back to the difference in the way we pronounce the consonants and the vowels, and even sometimes the syntactical division, which is generally similar, though there are some slight differences. So the way Yemenite Jews pronounce the text is considered to be the closest to the original pronunciation. Why is that, Rabbi?
It goes, to understand it, we have to go to the history of the Jewish Yemenite.
Do you want to start with the history? So let's go. Let's start. What is the history of the Yemenite Jews? How did Jews end up in Yemen? When why and how that affects the reading tradition, which presumably reflects the biblical tradition or
Yes.
the earliest tradition.
So I would like to start with saying that I am very pleased to be in your program, because I've seen that you are doing a very good job spreading the knowledge of Torah and Israel all over the world. It's very good. I
Thank you very
congratulate
much.
you. You know, I teach, maybe I teach some students here in Yerushalayim or somewhere in Israel, but you are going around, you know, Ufaratzta, Yama, Kedna, Tzafona, Venegba, to spreading knowledge, and I congratulate you. And
we believe, my father tells me that when the prophet says Umale'a haaretz de'a et Hashem, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, like the water covering the earth, the sea. My father tells me that's the internet, you know.
Yeah, that's right. So we are coming very close to Yemot HaMashiach. You know? This is another thing I would like to say, that my English is not very good. I told you, and you said, no, it's okay.
Everybody here, our friends, will manage the English. Don't worry.
We'll manage. Although I have been in England a few years and in Australia, but since then, you know, past many years that I don't practice the language so much. So the history of the Jewish of Yemenite. The community of the Yemenite people, according to historians, most of the historians say that their exile is since the destruction of the first temple. It means we are talking about nearly 2,500 years. And there are many evidences to say that. So they are from Shevet Yehuda, and some of them are Leviim, because the Leviim also lived in Yerushalayim, and they exiled, and they, you know, when Ezra and Nehemiah came back in Beit Sheni, very few of them came back to Eretz Israel, and they stayed in Yemen. So they were isolated physically, geographically. They are isolated from other communities, but not spiritually, because they kept the connection with all the Jewish centers all over the world. You know, at the beginning to Israel, and later on to Babylonia, and later on to Egypt, and to the Spain. They kept, we have many evidence to this. First of all, many customs that were in Eretz Israel.
Just a second, so let me summarize, Rabbi, let me summarize what we said so far to kind of complete the picture. So first temple is destroyed by the Babylonian, 586 before the Common Era. We are going to commemorate it this week. Both first and second temple were destroyed in this month. And then the people of Israel are spread to all kinds of places, mainly Babylon, but others as well. And that's the beginning of the Yemenite Jewry. When 70 years later, Cyrus the Great gives permission to the people to return, and Ezra and Nehemiah are leading some of the people back to Israel. The Jews living already in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, they find that it is good for them to stay there. They say, oh, thank you, but no, thank you, we're not coming back to Israel. However, while they were physically disconnected from main centers of the Jewish people, they kept on connecting in other ways. And we can know that from the traditions that you're going to present. How did they keep in connection? Through letters, responsa, emissaries?
You know, the community of Yemen, they were very wealthy at the beginning because it was the route to the commerce to India and other in Asia. and they were very wealthy and helped the Jews in Eretz Israel. We have many monuments in Bet Sha'arim, the tomb of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi.
Right, Judah the prince, we're talking about the beginning of the 3rd century of the Common Era. Judah the ethnarch, the prince, who is leading the people, and in his academy, which is in Bet Sha'arim, in the northern part of Israel, we have commemorations to Yemenite Jews.
Of many Jews from Yemen who helped the yeshivot in Eretz Israel, and they were buried there. We know that there is a Tana, Rabbi Shimon HaTemani. You know,
Right.
Shimon is from Yemen, like Rabbi Nahum Hamadi, and
Right.
other.
Nisbe,
So,
what's known as a nisbe in Arabic, an attribution of a person to his place, like Netanel of Gedera, right?
Oh, that's right. So Shimon HaTemani, so he is a Tana. He is from the era of the Tanaim.
Right. So just to give a kind of a historical perspective, the Tanaim is a period that ranges from, let's say, 200 BC to BCE to 200 CE. So
that's right. That's right. And later on, when the center, moves from Eretz Israel to Babylonia, they were in connection with the Amoraim and the Tanaim and the Geonim in Babel. We find many letters and igrot. It means
right, responsa letters. Responsa, when they write back to the centers, if they have like a very important issue, and they want to ask the greatest rabbis of the generation, so they send an emissary with a letter to Babylon, or later on to Egypt or to Israel, to these centers.
Yeah. So actually, as I said, geographically, physically, they were isolated, but they kept connection. But they kept their origin customs and minhagim of Eretz Israel. That later on, if you like, I will give some examples. Anyway, at the beginning, they had a very good time there, since the Muslims, the Muslims conquered the...
Right, with the rise of Islam, so just a second, we're talking about a much later period. We're now talking about the 7th century of the Common Era. Remember Yemen, just for us to kind of I'll put a picture on screen so people understand the geography. We're talking about the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. So just for us to understand what is Yemen, because people think that Yemen is a way to say yes, man in English. No, but that's not what we mean here, right? When we talk about Yemen, we're talking about the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. We have the Arabian Peninsula here. Here is Israel. Here is Egypt that was mentioned. Babylon is towards the lower part, okay, the closer part to what's known as Shat al-Arab in the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf. If you want to annoy someone who is Persian, you call it the Arabian Gulf. If you want to annoy someone who is Arab, you call it the Persian Gulf. Anyway, we're talking about Yemen, which is here at the bottom. This is Djibouti here just across. And maybe we'll even get to talk about the special connection between Yemenite Jewry, which is in Asia, and possibly African elements that are part of the Jewish people. We had Rabbi Dr. Sharon Shalom recently talking with us about the Ethiopian Jewry. So that's Yemen. And where did initially the Jews reside in Yemen? Where did they live? In which cities?
They live all over Yemen, but mainly, in Sana'a. Sana'a was the capital. Okay? My family came from Sana'a, from the capital, Yeah, as you said, my grandfather was the chief rabbi, and my father was the last chief rabbi. He was in charge and of letting the Jews, all the Jews, coming to Eretz Israel, because he was in a very good connection with the king. My grandfather was the physician of the king. He was also a physician.
Right. So this is a point that is very, very dominant, maybe with Yemenite Jewry, maybe as opposed to my tradition of Ashkenazi Jewry, when the rabbis in Yemen almost always, maybe always, I'm not an expert, also had a profession except for being a rabbi. So they all had professions. What were the professions of Yemenite Jews and Yemenite rabbis?
My grandfather and my father, they were in jewelry. They were,
smelters, and they were right. They were in jewelry. Very, very interesting. I just want to tell you, this is I don't know if my good friend Rafael is with us today. Oh no, I don't think he is. But I don't know. This is probably would come as a surprise. Mandais, people of the Mandais sect, they teach all of their kids to be jewelers. Yeah. So it's very common among Yemenite Jews as well. So that's a little bit about the history, and we are now talking about the rise of Islam. Again, to give it some context, Saudi Arabia. Okay, Saudi Arabia, Mecca is here. That's the Hijaz, the area of Hijaz, and with the expansion of Islam, okay, Yemen is brought under Islamic law. And how does that affect the Jews of Yemen? We're talking about the 7th century of the Common Era. Go ahead.
Since the Islam, rise, their life were worse, and because Muhammad, since the Jews were not accepting his faith, they trouble. They give them many troubles. So the Jews since then became in a very bad situation, a very bad life. But they kept, their faith and all the troubles that the Muslims caused them. They didn't succeed to change their mind. Although from time to time we heard that some of the Jews they became Muslims.
Right, and even
they couldn't stand the aggressive towards them.
Right. We're talking about a very difficult situation, and how, to the extent that when Maimonides, which we've mentioned already, is writing his famous letter to the people of Yemen, okay, in 1173, he talks about this pressure, okay, right?
That's right. Now, as you said, the Jews of Yemen were in connection with Rambam, because Rambam was living.
Just a second, for us it's very simple, but I want to remind everybody that Rambam is the acronym for Rabbi Moses, son of Maimon, which is Maimonides. In English, he is known as Maimonides. We call him Rambam. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Musa ibn Maimon, okay, known in Arabic.
Yeah. So in the 11th century, he was in Egypt. He came from Spain. From Spain, he had to run away from the Muslims to Morocco, and from Morocco he came to Eretz Israel, and Eretz Israel he didn't find a community to live, and he left to Egypt, and he became, the chief rabbi of Egypt, and also the doctor of the Saladin, the king of
Right. The
Egypt.
famous Saladin, okay, the
Saladin.
Saladin who conquered later on the land of Israel and beat the Crusaders. So Saladin al-Ayyubi, who Maimonides was his doctor, and the community in Yemen was in strong ties with him.
That's right. So since they had so many troubles, some of the people claimed that they are the Mashiach, the Messiah, false Messiah, and they didn't know how to deal with him. So they sent a letter to Maimonides asking him, and he was very impressed from them because he learned that they keep their religion and they learned Torah. They were they were expert in the Talmud and the Halakha. And he was very impressed because he said, I can see all over the world the Jews stopped learning Torah, but I found that the people of Yemen, they keep it, and all of them learning Torah. Since the child, from the age of 3 years old, he goes to school and he starts learning. At the age of 5, 6, he also can read and go and read the Torah, even on Shabbat, he read the Torah.
Oh, maybe yeah, that's a good thing to talk about. There are very, very interesting traditions that are related to the public reading of the Torah among Yemenite Jews, which distinguish them from other Jews. And let me just mention a few. So first of all, kids really at the age of 3, in my neighborhood, okay, this is a living tradition which still happens today. They go to the teacher, it's called the Mori, which is literally master, okay, the master. They go to him, and today it's for candy. In the past, if you wouldn't do your job by the Mori, you would get not candy, but something else. Today, it works differently. By the way, they would have like a stone that he would put here, so they have to kind of watch the book, and if they like lift their eyes off the book, the stone would fall, and the master, the teacher, would know they stopped looking at the book, and he could slap them. So, but that's what, ancient times. Today it's candy, and the kids love going there. But it teaches them from a very early age to read, and not just read, guys, but read very accurately. Like I do to you when you read a Hebrew verse and I say, no, read it again. You didn't read exactly. So that's what the master does to the Mori, does to the kids at the age of 3 and 4. And then what is also interesting, and I think it's really a historical coincidence, is that Yemenite Jews, because they tend to keep these traditions very, very firmly, they still translate the Torah into Aramaic, okay? In the late Second Temple period, people were no longer speaking Hebrew. We already see in the book of Nehemiah that the knowledge of Hebrew is declining. Nehemiah says, oh, I saw the kids, they speak, half of them speak Ashdodian, they don't know how to speak Jewish. So the knowledge of Aramaic rises, the knowledge of Hebrew declines, and since we wanted everybody to understand what the Torah said, so a person is reading from the Torah, and then someone is translating it for the whole crowd, so they translate to the language everybody understands, which again, if we go 2,200 years back, it's Aramaic. And today they still keep that tradition, though nobody in the crowd, no, I don't want to say nobody, but basically everybody in the crowd are native Hebrew speakers. They much more easily understand the Hebrew, but the Yemenites still keep on translating every verse into Aramaic, and that shows you how steadfast, how strongly they are connected to their traditions, even when the circumstances change. So it's a very interesting tradition, right? Do you still keep translating in your synagogue into Aramaic?
Yeah, still, we are still doing it exactly like it was in Eretz Israel. This is what the Talmud says. The Talmud says, "Hakore kore b'Torah, ve'hametargem metargem."
Right.
You know,
So
the
that we
reader,
go back to the Talmudic traditions and rabbinic tradition of again starting about 2,200 years ago, and still living tradition in almost every Yemenite synagogue. I can tell you, like on the without the rabbi listening, that there are some Yemenite communities who kind of don't do it anymore, but they, most of them, I hope, keep doing it.
most of them keep, yeah.
And what I suggested to them, that they should start translating into English. This way they'll know English better.
Yeah.
But
That,
anyway,
the idea that the Aramaic translation, it was by Onkelos. Onkelos was the Tana, was at the time of the Mishnah. He was the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. And his translation, it's not a literary translation. It is the idea, because all the places that, give the God body, describe the God in a body like a human being, the Onkelos explained it differently, so we will not think that God has a body.
yeah, it's an abstractization of anthropomorphic descriptions of God.
That's right. So
Right. Sorry for making it in fancy English words. Okay.
they were on Shabbat, every Shabbat, the reader is, read the Torah, and there is a little boy next to him, as you said, next to him, and translate every pasuk. It takes long time. But
right. And by the way, guys, remember, these are sometimes 6-year-old, 7-year-old kids that are translating it into Aramaic, while they themselves don't know really what they say. Sometimes they do know. It depends on the child, how gifted they are. But it's an amazing living tradition that still works today. By the way, the Yemenites, if we're already talking about Yemenite synagogues, they are small. They tend to be small. If you take, I don't know, most of the Jewish communities with which you are familiar are European Jewish communities. That's the majority of Jewish communities around the world. In North America and in Europe, they're usually, again, not always, but usually they are Ashkenazi. Oftentimes they're very large. They would have hundreds of members sometimes. Yemenite synagogues are small. What's the reason that Yemenite synagogues tend to be small?
The reason is because everyone wants to read a part in the Torah every week, but you have only 7 people who can read the Torah. Everyone wants to take part in the tefillah. They like, we don't have a chazan. Everybody is a chazan.
Right. This is also something that like preserves a very early tradition. Let me explain. It takes some explanation, so let me explain. When you go to a regular, when I say regular, I mean Ashkenazi, for me, European descent synagogue, you would have everyone reading their own part solemnly, like silently. And in the Yemenite communities, if it's a blessing, it is only the leader of the prayer who is reading it, and everybody listens, which goes back again to the instructions as they are in the earlier sources. And that's another interesting tradition. So you have small communities going back to the time that families lived together and they had one room for prayer, okay, and the family would convene together. And even today, oftentimes these synagogues are small and family oriented. That is to say, it's the Tanami, it's the name of the family is also the name of the synagogue oftentimes.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
So, you know, everyone can read. You know, a child of bar mitzvah, usually he goes to a teacher who, you know, teach him to read his portion, but not the Yemenite, because every child since 5 years old, 6 years old, he already can read the Torah, and he goes and read his portion, you know, together with the adults. So we don't have, you know, a bar mitzvah who has to learn his portion, to go to a teacher to teach him. Every child, he knows, you know, his portion. And this is
I want to tell you a story, Rabbi. I had a friend, a Yemenite friend, when I served in the military, and he used to tell me a story. He said to me, listen, what my father would do to me, he would tell me the following. He would say to me, listen, this week I paid in the synagogue, so you get to read one of the portions of the weekly portion. But he would never tell me which part. So I had to learn the whole thing.
yes.
So I never knew which part I'm going to be called for to read. So he had to learn every week the whole, you know, the whole weekly portion, which is oftentimes long. It could be up to 150 verses, and you have to know them almost by heart, so to speak, because you don't have the vowel pointings and you don't have the tropes, the cantillation notes. So you have to know them. So his father would tell him, listen, I paid for the synagogue for you to read a part, but I'm not telling you which one. So that's a system. If you want to take that system, I'm not telling anyone that I told you, and your kids would be in trouble, or your grandkids.
Yeah, you are right. You know, the Jews of Yemen, they were actually the first ones to come to Eretz Israel in 1882.
Right. Amalti ele betamar. Right. In the year, according to the Jewish date, we're talking about 5,648, which, all right, 42. Sorry,
82.
which would be 1882.
That's right. You know, they came a few months before the Bilu group who came from Russia. So usually this group from Russia, it says Ha'aliyah Harishona. But really the people of Yemen, they came few months before them. And because they found in Shir HaShirim, how do you say Shir HaShirim?
Song of Songs. Song of Songs.
They said, Amarti ele betamar, and betamar tafresh mimbet, which is 1882. So they decided we go, and 5,000 Jews came to Yemen, to Eretz Israel, you know, with the bad conditions, but they loved Eretz Israel. Who met them? A Rav Kook, what was the chief rabbi of Eretz, the first chief rabbi of Eretz Israel. And he wrote a letter to his father, who was still in Lithuania. He wrote to him, and they said, I'm so glad that some people, that some Jews came from Yemen, and all of them, tradition, all of them learned the Torah. There is nobody who is Amaretz. Amaretz means he who couldn't read Torah, who couldn't learn Torah, and he says, it's for me, I'm so happy, he is writing, to find Jews who are keeping the tradition, you know, the old tradition. Here is the pasuk, very good.
Right.
Excellent.
Right. So let me just explain. The first people to have come to Israel in the modern age to make aliyah, to make the immigration into Israel, were Yemenite Jews who came a little bit before what's known as the first wave of immigration, the first aliyah. And we're talking about the year 1882. And the reason they came at that year is because the book of Song of Songs, as you can see on screen, says, Rabbi, would you read for us in the traditional melody of the Song of Songs
Yes.
for us this verse?
כן. אמרתי עלה ותאמר אחזו בסנסינו ויהיונו שורייך כאשכול וג'פן וריח שמונייך כתפוחים.
What a beautiful melody. I love it, guys. Anyway, the word betamar, if we look at the gematria, if we look at the alphanumerical value of this word, the tav is 400, the resh is 200, the mem is 40, and the bet is 2. All in all, 642, which is equivalent, 5,642 is equivalent to the year 1882. So they said, I shall go up. Go up means move to Israel, immigrate to Israel in the year 1882. And this is why a party of 5,000 Jews came from Yemen to Israel, because they believed that is the time to start to come back to Israel. And indeed, they were right. Here we are in Israel. Now,
by the way, Rav Kook was very happy because they were workers, good workers, and there was no place in Yerushalayim, you know, between the wall of Yerushalayim. So they went outside. The first Jews who went outside Yerushalayim, and they lived in the caves in Siloam, which is today a Shiloah, which is called Siloam, outside the walls of Yerushalayim. And so they increased the number of Jews around Yerushalayim.
Right, guys, Silwan, if you remember Hezekiah's tunnel inscription, is found in the Shiloah, and Silwan is the village just outside that. Today, this is a big issue where here you can see Silwan, but back then in the late 19th century, there was a Jewish village of Yemenite Jews in Silwan. Today it's an Arab neighborhood, and it's a very, very political issue there, the area there, because again, it was Jewish, but do you, you know, to what extent you resettle these areas? That's an interesting issue. And we've actually did, Rabbi, we did a fun tour of the city of David a few months ago online for everybody here. And last week we did a tour of the destruction of Jerusalem, some with a friend of mine who is an archaeologist and a tour guide in Jerusalem. So that connects us. That the Silwan area had a neighborhood of Yemenite Jews who came there. What other traditions, interesting traditions we've talked about the music and the melody. So I want to say that everybody of the Yemenite Jews are gifted musically, or almost everybody. I should say, guys, I don't know if you know the Eurovision contest, but every time up until last year when Israel won and it wasn't a Yemenite, every time Israel won the Eurovision, it was a Yemenite singer, okay, up until the last time, which we won and it wasn't a Yemenite. But before that, in 78, I think, and 77 and 90 something, when we won, it was all Yemenite singer. How come there are so many Yemenite singers? I must here admit to something. I should go 18 years ago, no, 17 years ago, maybe. I had a Yemenite girlfriend back then, and it was before I got married, and she is a singer as well. So how come so many Yemenite Jews are singers and have this gift of music?
You are asking me?
Yes, Rabbi, I'm asking you. How come?
I don't know exactly, but first of all, they have emotions. They're very emotional. The Yemenites. They suffered so much, and the people who suffered, they found a way to express their feelings. Maybe because of that, my grandmother said that every baby they used to give him every day a spoon of oil, olive oil. Every baby, every day. Maybe this is one of the reasons, but I don't know exactly. I don't know.
Okay, but it's indeed the poetry of the Yemenite Jews reflects a lot of emotions, a lot of yearning to return to Israel, and a lot of emotions about the state of affairs for Yemenite Jews. The famous Abba Shalom Shabazi, who was a very famous poet for the Yemenite Jews, and whose songs are really still influential in modern Israel sometimes. So other issues of the amazing Yemenite Jewry. How come? Okay, what are other traditions that are unique to Yemenite Jews as far as the folklore, food, music, family? What are other traditions that
Yeah.
you think are interesting?
Yeah, first of all, we have seen there, our pronunciation of the letters and the atnuot,
Vowels, the consonants
the
and the
vowels,
vowels.
it's a very old and very ancient. They said it's from Eretz Israel. The kamatz, it's all like the Ashkenazi. We say Boruch. We don't say Baruch like the Sephardi. We say Boruch. And we have a difference between Taf and Taf. If you have a dot into the Taf, we say Taf. Without, it's a Taf. The Ashkenazi says Sa, Sa, because they couldn't pronounce the Sa, because they don't have in Europe the Sa. Take the pasuk. אמרתי אלה בתומר, the
Right. Right. So
so
the tav without the dagesh is pronounced as an unvoiced interdental consonant, like th as in think in English.
Yeah. So the het and the chaf is different. Het we say het or chazah, and chaf is chaf. So we have a difference. Every letter has a different pronunciation. Also, every vowel have a different pronunciation. We don't have segol. Segol, the three dots. E'ele. We don't say e'ele, we say a'ala. Why? Because in the Babylonian vowels, there was no segol.
Right. So let me explain a little bit about the background.
Yeah.
Around the 7th century, there starts several systems of nikud to arise, vowel pointing. One of those systems, several systems, few here in Israel and one in Babylon, which might also originate originally from Israel, but one of them becomes very, very dominant. That's the Tiberian system. That's the regular one that with which we're familiar. But there is another one, the Babylonian system, where we don't distinguish between the segol and the patach. So for Yemenite Jews, segol and patach is the same sound, the ah.
That's right. This is regarding this, but there is any other examples. We Yemenites, we say the prayer together. There is, we don't. Everybody prays by himself, but we sing it all together. Most of the prayer we say it together. All the Zmirot, all the Shirat Hayam, and the Mizmorim, all of them we say together, as it was in the time of the Talmud. So you go to a Yemenite synagogue, you can hear all of them singing all the tefillah, all the prayer, not only part of it that everyone says by himself, but all the congregation. This is another thing. If you you know, there is some customs in the synagogue. We sit around the synagogue. We don't sing, you know, line by line like in the European synagogues. We sit around. If you go to the archaeologies, you find the synagogues in Eretz Israel, the old synagogues in Bet Alpha, in Yericho, in Susia, in Ramat HaGolan, all the ancient synagogues from the time of the Talmud, or even from the time of the temple, you can find them sitting round and not sitting by lines until now.
Right. So let me just explain a little bit more about what you said here. The sitting in a Yemenite synagogue goes back to a convention of sitting that we can find in ancient synagogue. For instance, I think an example that some people might have actually been there, if you visited Masada, okay, so Masada has its synagogue, and you can see it is kind of seated all around. I'm looking for a picture to put on screen, and that is similar to the way in which you would find the seating in a Yemenite synagogue, which is very different than the way an Ashkenazi synagogue would be seating, where everybody is facing forward. I just want to share a picture of some ancient synagogues. For instance, here is the one from Masada. Just let me share the picture. Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes. Here is an example for how everybody is sitting around.
Oh, beautiful. That's it.
Yeah. And that's more the convention in Yemenite synagogue, as opposed to an Ashkenazi synagogue, which would be more like a church, so to speak, where everybody is sitting with not facing each other, but facing the front of the synagogue. Again, by even the design of synagogue, guys, is a big issue, you know, historically speaking. How about Yemenite food? Why do Yemenites love hot food? Rabbi, can you hear me? Rabbi, can you hear me?
Now I hear you.
Okay, I was asking, how about food? Why do Yemenite Jews love hot food?
You know, you can't explain why, you know, about food, everybody and his customs. Maybe because Yemen was in the path of the you know, tavlinim, spices route to India. Maybe because of that, so they like hot food. We can see here this chug, very hot.
Right, this is chug, right? The very famous Yemenite spicy condiment. It's very interesting to see that people who live around the equator, they love hot food, and it helps to preserve food, and it really, you don't need even to keep it in the refrigerator, though it's recommended, because it's so hot the germs don't come near it, right?
Yeah. Listen, the Jews of Yemen, you know, every day they cooked a fresh food, and they didn't have, you know, conserves or food, artificial food. They ate only natural. And when they came to Israel, You know, the doctors didn't find that they had any diseases. No heart diseases, or they were very healthy. But a few years later, you know, when they came, after 10 years that they were in Israel, they start eating, you know, all sorts of things, and they became like everybody, like all the rest of the Israelis, with difficulties in health. But when they came to Israel, no heart diseases, no blood diseases. You know, they were very, very strong and very healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Rabbi, I have asked you so much, and we've talked about Yemenite Jewry, which again, I personally love it. Why don't you have instruments? You're so gifted musically, but Yemenite music is based on rhythm and based on vocal singing. Almost no instrumental music at all. Great
That's right.
singers, excellent sense of rhythm, good dancers, guys, excellent dancers. I don't want to, I tried reading like a Yemenite. I'm not going to dance like a Yemenite. Even I have some limits. But why don't you have instruments?
Oh, because we didn't use any musical instruments, because the Talmud says, since the destruction of Bet HaMikdash, you know, tomorrow night is Tisha B'Av, since the destruction of Bet HaMikdash, we are not allowed to use music. We are not allowed to sing with musical instruments. The only community, a Jewish community in the world, who kept this law is the Jews of Yemen. So they didn't use it. Maybe this is the reason you said that they are very talented in singing, because they didn't have the instruments. They had to use their voice. Maybe this is one of the reasons.
Okay, excellent.
We
I
are
want to.
we are mourning, you know, the destruction of the Israel. When the rabbi says don't use it, we keep it, like many other customs that we still keep until now, and other communities stop.
Right. I want to say something about really the tradition and the education of the Yemenite Jews, which maybe is relevant for everybody, guys. We all want our kids to kind of keep our traditions, and also be independent, but also keep our tradition and our identity. And there is something in the very interesting tradition and welcoming tradition and the atmosphere that is created by Yemenite Jews that enables them to be, in my opinion, again, I didn't do the statistics, but it enables them to be more successful in keeping their kids not alienated from their traditions. Even if they don't necessarily follow them like 100%, they are rarely alienated. They rarely feel, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with my tradition, but they tend to be connected to their traditions. And again, there might be several elements that create that, but you can see if you go to a Yemenite synagogue on the Shabbat, you can see people that would not orderly on the everyday life, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, they are living a very religious life on a daily basis, but they definitely come to the synagogue on Shabbat and try to continue these traditions. And it's a very, in my opinion, it's a place where the Yemenite Jewry is more successful than some of the other communities in Israel. Again, I didn't do the statistic. It's kind of a personal feeling that I have, my intuition. And I want to open it for the guys to ask some questions, if you don't mind, Rabbi.
With pleasure.
So guys, if you have any questions about Yemenite Jewry and the traditions of Yemenite Jewry, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. Simon, I saw that you raised your hand before. Go ahead.
Yes, Rabbi. Do you actually live in Yemen?
Yes, I was born in Yemen. I came to Israel where I was 3 years old.
So you're in Israel at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah, he was
Now I
born
live
in Yemen and he came to Israel at the age of 3.
Yeah. Now I live in
Because
Jerusalem.
it's because Yemen is somewhere that needs healing. You know, it's one of the worst places in the world for violence and destruction, and
Right.
you know everything that's bad. You know, with all your wisdom as a rabbi, you know, and you've got that. Can you say how things should move forward?
It's more of it's an interesting question. Rabbi, he's asking about the current political state of affairs in Yemen between the Houthi and other minorities. I don't know. First of all, there are very few Jews that are now in Yemen, right? Just maybe a family or two. Very few. And I don't know that the Yemenite Jewish community is keeping strong ties to the country of Yemen. To the traditions, yes, but not so much to the country itself, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Okay, surprise.
Actually,
Yeah? Yes, Rabbi, go ahead.
I was, you know, the Israeli government want me and some rabbis to visit Yemen. It was 20 years ago, with you know, a goodwill. They started, you know, the ministry, the foreign ministry of Yemen wanted something from the Americans, and they one of the ways to keep connection with them is to visit Yemen by Jews and maybe to have some connection with Israel. But you know, a few days before we had to leave to Yemen, there was army distribute, and we couldn't do it. So I missed it. I missed it because I wanted to go and see where our forefathers live and how they live, etc.
Okay, surprise.
Any other question?
Yes, I have a question. My question is that there is a story that we left halfway, the story of Rambam from Spain, and then we just came with it to Egypt. So from Egypt, we didn't hear the conclusion of Rambam.
I see. As we said, the Jews of Yemen were merchants, and there was a connection with Egypt. And they needed someone, you know, very wise, you know, to ask him how to manage with the troubles of the Muslims and with the troubles of the false Messiah. And the Rambam I asked them few questions, and they found out how strong is the community. And since then, the Jews kept visiting Rambam, writing, you know, his book Mishneh Torah, the code of the Torah. They wrote from his own book, and therefore the Yemenite scripts of Rambam are the original ones. And since then, they followed Rambam in everything. You see, they all the customs and the halachic, they follow Rambam, not the Shulchan Aruch. Not the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam.
Right. So let me explain what Rabbi is really saying is that the connection that was made between the Yemenite Jewry and Maimonides, Rambam, led to them following his legal decidings and his legal rulings rather than the sages that were followed elsewhere in North Africa, in the Middle East, or in Europe. Okay, so they kept his rulings and the strong connection to Rambam who wrote them back and encouraged them in their time of needs. Clark.
Historically, there's been a connection between Yemen and the other side of the sea there to Eritrea and Djibouti and Ethiopia now. Linguistically, those are Semitic languages.
That's right.
Is there a connection that's known or suspected between the Yemenite Jews and the Ethiopian Jews?
Not really, not very much. You know, merchants with the besamim, how do you call it? The besamim,
The spices and the
spices,
fragrances.
you know, the spices. But not. We didn't know of Jews from Ethiopia came to Yemen or Yemenites who went to Ethiopia. And there was no a connection between these two communities. The only connection was Egypt when Rambam was there. I mean a deep and a strong connection. But merchant connection was all over, with Babylonia, with Syria, with Spain, with India, especially with India. Some of Jews later on went to India, but very few. But we didn't hear any Jews from India came to Yemen.
Russ.
Yes, Rabbi, because the Yemenites fled to Yemen before the rabbinic period, I was curious if the dietary laws of the Yemenite Jews are the same as the rabbinic Jewish practices or more of an ancient practice.
Yeah, exactly, you know, like all the Jews, with all the rules of the Talmud and the Mishnah. You know, they followed the Talmud and the Mishnah, and especially according to the halacha of Rambam. And I'll give you one example that it is in the Talmud, but nobody is fulfilling it except the Jews of Yemen. We boil we made halita to the meat, you know.
They boil the meat before they cook it.
Yeah, because there is blood still inside. You know, after you put salt, etc. But there is some still blood inside. So what we have to do is to boil it, to put the meat into a boiled water, so the blood will not come out. This is what the Talmud says. The only one to keep it, make halita, is the Yemenite people. So
in order not to eat blood, the Bible says, do not eat blood. Okay,
Yeah.
for the blood is the soul, or is the essence of the person. So there are certain rules how to avoid eating blood. And one of the rules is to boil the meat before you cook it. And the only ones who still boil it before they cook it is the Yemenite Jews.
Yeah, and more than that, all the customs of the Talmud and the Mishnah, we keep them until now, while other communities stopped keeping it. This is very interesting, although maybe because they were isolated. As I said before, isolated geographically, but not spiritually. Spiritually, they continue to keep the connection with the centers of the Jews. If Eretz Israel or Babylonia or Spain later on or Egypt. Although they expelled, you know, immediately after the destruction, but they kept connection with the Torah Shebaal Peh. They keep all the Torah Shebaal Peh more than any other community.
Okay, all the oral traditions, right. Georgie, last question, please.
Yeah, my question is two questions. One is, how long do you think that there is evidence of the connections with India? And the second question is based on that itself. I read in one of the documents from India that the fork which was used in the Solomon's temple was somewhat found in India, and it was taken back to Israel. It is very long story. There is some evidence somewhere, somebody has found it. Have you got any knowledge about that in Yemen?
If you can explain it to
Yes, that's my job. Two things. One is, what's the earliest evidence for a connection between the Yemenite Jewry and India? That's one question. The other one was about a story about something from the temple, a fork taken from the temple and found and being brought back. Not a story that I'm familiar with. So for that, let's say the second question, Georgie, you send me an email and I'll forward it to the rabbi. And let's take the first one. What's the earliest evidence to the connection between the Yemenite Jewry and India?
There are some letters, you know, from, the people of India used to send questions to the rabbis of Yemen because they, although they are very far, you know, they're very far, but because of the connection, the mentioned connection, we found the letters in the, you know, from the ancient time. I think, you know, the oldest one is, the earliest one is maybe the 6th century, something like that. Yeah. But because since you mentioned this, actually we found, the archaeologists found a stone in a mosque in Yemen, the Hebrew writing and the names of the Kohanim, of the
priests.
You know, Mishpachot HaKehuna, you know.
Right, the priestly family. There were 24 of them, and they found a stone with a name of some of these families in a mosque in Yemen.
In Yemen. So the archaeologist says it was a synagogue. Since the temple, the second temple, it was a synagogue, and some of the Yemenite Kohanim, priests, they used to take part in the work in Bet HaMikdash, and therefore they have this stone. So they kept connection with Eretz Israel, and the Kohanim went to take part in the work in the Mikdash because they were Kohanim. So this is from very with Eretz Israel, you know, we have very a lot of evidences, the connection with them. But with India, very few. But the old one, I think, from the 6th century.
Okay.
Okay,
Very
thank you.
good. Rabbi, is there anything you wanna kind of a song or a melody or something you wanna give us a taste of Yemenite tradition? If it's not embarrassing. If I know it, I will join. But
listen, it doesn't come to me this moment.
Maybe from the Zafa, maybe something, or from the, or now we started the month not too long ago, maybe something, whatever, something of Shabbat, whatever, maybe something very familiar.
Yeah, okay, maybe just one line.
You want to do the Rorikra?
Okay.
Okay, so let me just give a little bit of a context. This is a poem written about 1,000 years ago by a medieval Jewish grammarian by the name of Dunash, son of Labrat, and it has a very famous Yemenite melody. The rabbi will sing, and I will try not to ruin too much.
Naim Shimcha Velo Yoshba ונוחו ביום שבת שבו ונוחו ביום שבת.
Thank you very much. That was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Very
That was
well,
wonderful.
nice.
Just one another thing that I want to say. The Jews of Yemen never sang from the sentences from the Bible, from the Torah, since the Bible says that we are not, the Talmud says we are not allowed to sing psukim, sentences from the Torah. We are not allowed because they are holy and we are not allowed to make them songs. So all their songs are written by poets, but not taken from the Bible. Now,
Right, so they don't sing verses, but they do sing poems of a rich tradition. And as I said, most of them are very good singers.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. This has been a pleasure. Okay. We still have to hear the rest of the poem because it was just the first strophe. So we keep, so we'll keep practicing. And thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure. And it was, thank you very much for coming and for teaching us a bit about the traditions, the unique traditions of Yemenite Jewry that preserve many of these traditions for so long. Even when the context changes, even when the circumstances changes, Yemenite Jews, they stick to their traditions, which is an amazing thing. Again, in such a changing environment. So it's a bit of like a rock in time, which is, again, in our world, the identity of a person is so strongly related to his sources, to the origins, and it's really a challenge of everybody in the modern world to kind of find the right way to combine their traditions with the changing ways of time. And it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
If you would be willing to come back, we still have a lot to talk about Rambam himself, right? To talk about him, his psychology, even his music. I think you wrote a paper about the music in the writings of Maimonides. And maybe in the future we'll get together again and we'll talk about Maimonides.
With pleasure, and I am very, I apologize that my English,
everything is all right.
Your English is perfect.
It is perfect.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
That's beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi, for coming.
Rabbi.
We always give a clap to our guests. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Rabbi. Tomorrow we're going to do a reading of the book of Eicha, of Lamentations here. It's not going to be in a Yemenite tradition, but you know what? Maybe we'll do the first verse just now if we have an opportunity in the Yemenite tradition, because tomorrow I will do it in my own Ashkenazi tradition. So I'll read it once, just the first maybe couple of verses in Ashkenazi tradition, and you do it in the Yemenite tradition. We do it?
All right.
Okay. So I'll do first in a kind of an Ashkenazi tradition, and then you go with the Yemenite tradition. Eicha yasheva vadad, ha'ir rabat yam, hayeta ka'almana, רבתי בגויים, צרתי במדינות, הייתה למד, בכל תבכה בלילה, ודמעתה על לחיה, אלה מנחם מכל אוהביה, כל רעיה בגדו בה, היו לך לאויבים. So now, Rabbi, you go with a Yemenite reading.
Yair Rabbodi Ayato Kalmono Rabbodi Bajayin Sarati Mamadina Ayato Romas وخاتبك بالليل بدمعته على حياة إنه منحين مكل أباه كل رعاه السيغاه آيونا لا يبين.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's beautiful, so beautiful. I shouldn't.
I wish it is the last. I wish that is the last Shabbat next year in Yerushalayim.
Amen, amen. Next
Amen,
year
amen.
in Jerusalem.
Amen.
Bye-bye.
Amen. Amen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.